Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to those of you listening on News Radio 600 Kogo. This is the Voice of San Diego on the podcast. My name is Scott Lewis, and I'm here with my friend Andrew Keatts.
What's up, my dudes?
My other friend, Sarah Libby.
What's up?
How are you?
Doing great.
Yeah? I've had a tough
week.
week.
Better than you, yeah.
It's been a tough week for me. Something very special has been taken from me.
Oh, right.
The Twitter, this machine that I've cultivated and practiced and also sort of evangelized for years, betrayed me. It's betrayed me and has expanded the character limit for tweets to 280 from 140. And it's changed everything. It's keeping me up. Yeah. I'm upset. And here's the problem with it is that, I think they focused on the tweeter and not the tweet reader. I think they were obsessed with making it easier to tweet and not easier to consume, because these globulous garbage elephant tweets that are coming at me right now hurt my eyes, and I can't process them. I'm having so much trouble with this. However, a local thinker, Maya Rosas, brilliantly satirized what was happening with a tweet last night. She says, "Here's a picture from my office. I'm really only posting this because I think I may have 280 characters. Hey, guess what? I'm going on vacation to Spain, Portugal, and France next week. That's pretty rad, yes? Anyway, this is what's happening." A perfect satire of what's happening to Twitter.
I don't know if people realize it, but you're not doing a bit. I've seen you. You are truly shaken. This has really affected you.
I feel like I'm starting to get worked up by how worked up Scott is.
Yeah. You don't understand. I spent a long time.
You know what you're like? It's like,
look, I'm really good at Twitter too. I just don't need to talk about it all the time or get bothered by it.
It's a big part of his identity.
No, I spent a long time getting good at the 140. Honing tweets down, and I know exactly how it fits in my brain. And that was stolen from me. It's like the game, they just changed. It's like Monopoly getting rid of Park Place.
No, you know what it's like? It's like, those guys who are really good at shooting free throws? Mm-hmm. They're not good at basketball necessarily. Right. They haven't spent their time getting good at basketball. They've just mastered how to shoot free throws.
Yes.
The muscle memory for how to shoot a free throw on a 10-foot basket from a 10-foot free throw line is perfect.
Yes.
That's who you are.
Yeah. I fully admit it was
they've
worthless.
Just suddenly moved the free throw line back 4 feet. And you're all out of sorts.
No, they moved it closer and they put a platform.
I don't feel like that's true because you're good at all of the communicating. You're good at writing. I know. I can't even believe I just said that. But you're good at writing all kinds of
You're a good
word
basketball
counts.
player.
You're a good basketball player.
I keep coming back to this was a game, and it's been taken from me. That's all. But also, you have to admit, and please do, even though you hate me, that it's awful.
It's really bad. It's really bad. Twitter was perfect at 140 characters. You could just kind of breeze through all these various thoughts without ever being too invested in them. And now these long ones, it's like I have to decide ahead of time whether I really care enough to read it. And often I decide I don't, but it's too late.
I'm going to disagree.
Okay.
First of all, the only uses of the 280 I've seen are hilarious parodies.
That's true.
That's a good point.
Second of all, I've been on Twitter since 2009, and back then it was like people just talked about it in terms of it's just for people to share what they're having for lunch.
Yeah.
And it was so obviously better and more awesome than that, and I think it's still awesome.
All right, I'll survive.
You're gonna make it through, buddy.
It's just it was a really big deal for me, and people in San Diego. I did a lot to bring San Diego onto this platform.
Boy.
This is your
and
this
I think
is your
they
worst
understand
recurring claim.
It's true, though. There's a bunch of people listening right now that got onto Twitter because of me.
And now they're all gonna,
in fact,
like troll you with 280 more.
Well, they all agree. J.K. Rowling agrees with me.
Oh boy.
One of them is coming on the show, Mark Cafferty from the Regional Economic Development Corporation. We're gonna bro out with him later, and he came on because of me. All right, so I'm not trying to. It's not an ego thing. I'm just saying, like, I did this. They're not listening to me. Whatever Twitter's doing, they're not listening to me.
This isn't an ego thing. Twitter needs to listen to me.
No, it's true. No, I mean, people like me who
really
actually,
what just happened on this show.
People like me who actually like have contributed to the platform for this many years should have some sort of like input on how it goes. But I'm not. That's fine. We'll move on. One story that captured us this week: Mario Karan he's got a way of busting things up sometimes.
Yeah.
Busted up an interesting story. Records obtained by Voice of San Diego show that in 2014, 2015, just that school year alone, San Diego Unified School District referred 388 parents to a collections agency for debts that ranged from $10 to $500. And the debt was for bus.
Yeah.
Riding the school bus.
Riding the school bus costs $500 in San Diego. I didn't know this.
For one kid.
Yeah.
For one kid.
It costs more if you have multiple kids.
Yeah, so there's basically two big revelations here. One is that it costs $500 to go to public school, depending on if you need to be transported to that school.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy to me. That really defies
surprise.
my understanding of public education and the school bus. And then the other one is that if you're for some reason unable to pay in full, that the school district refers you to a collections agency.
And not just a person in their office, like one of the big ones that comes down hard on you.
Yeah, and so like we heard from some people, it was, it costs $500 to ride the school bus. You know, if you're sending your kid to school and you have them ride the bus, you already know that. But the collections piece of it, which is something that can ruin your credit, and if you don't eventually make the school district whole, your kids can't use the bus that next year. That was something that surprised even like people who knew this was going on.
Yeah.
So Mario talked to somebody from the head of a national like administrators association. He said he'd literally never heard of parents being sent to collections over bus
you
fees.
called it bus shaming, right?
Yeah.
We've heard about lunch shaming. What was the lunch shaming phenomenon?
So lunch shaming is something that happens when kids who qualify for free or reduced lunch, or I guess it must be reduced lunch, or they don't pay for school lunch or fall behind. They get shamed by having like different lunches than everyone else, or being called out for being poor.
For not paying the bill, right?
Yeah, and so these things that their parents are struggling with, they fall on the kids, and it makes them really visible in a really terrible way.
Yeah. So there's some context in the piece. So state law requires school boards waive transportation fees for students with disabilities or those with indigent parents or guardians. But the State Board of Education has said it's, quote, strongly recommends school districts offer free transportation to students who qualify for free meals. So if you're poor enough to qualify for a free meal in the district, it doesn't mean, ergo, you're qualified for this free public transportation, for free busing.
Right.
In fact, San Diego Unified doesn't keep to this recommendation and only provides the busing for students who go to the magnet schools.
Yeah, so the state has said we strongly recommend that if you qualify for free lunch, that you also qualify for free busing, and San Diego Unified says no.
That's, it's wild to me. And even taking a step back from all of that, California is one of only a handful of states that allows districts to charge for bus transportation to school in the first place.
Yeah, there are only 12.
And that isn't even a requirement. That's just an allowance. You're allowed to do that. You're not. It's not as though you must.
I mean, it's another chapter in that file of how hard it is to be poor. It is really hard to be poor. Things start piling on you, fines, government problems, just getting your car registered, all kinds of things become really hard when you're poor.
Well, and this really, to me, requires a rethinking of the school choice program, because part of, or maybe not a rethinking, but it's just it casts a poor light on it.
Especially with the district this year championing it more than I've ever seen. The window closes November 13th.
Right, and the idea being, we offer many different schools that offer many different types of programs, and no matter who you are, we can find a program that's right for you. But it's just crazy to think that if you're a poor person, that a $500 charge or a $750 charge if you have 2 kids wouldn't enter into your decision to take advantage of that program, or in this case, to not take advantage of that program.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you're probably the more likely to have to meet certain hours and to be less flexible in your job and able
and to be
to take your kid to school.
And to have a local school that you most would like to choice out of if
Right.
you could.
All right, go to voiceofsandiego.org, our sharp, new, beautiful website, and check out that story. I'm sure it'll be featured for several days on the front there. If you have been following us, we've been talking, obviously, about the vacation rental situation and marching towards the big meeting next month, which I'm sure will solve the whole issue for the city of San Diego.
It'll definitely happen, and it'll definitely solve everything.
Yes.
Hard to imagine it being delayed and anything like that.
Or anything being punted.
Yeah.
Well, a couple weeks ago, the city attorney, of course, city's attorney Mara Elliott of the city of San Diego, dropped a bomb on the whole short-term vacation rental discussion when she questioned the legality of the 2 main proposals for regulating them. So when that happened, she put out a memo, right? And I heard about some interesting communications between her chief of staff, Jerry Braun, and someone in city council offices. And so I requested all the communications from him to 2 different city council member offices. And it was rejected. The request was rejected.
On what grounds?
Happens a lot.
Yeah.
That happens.
Not on, it wasn't that the records didn't exist. It wasn't that there was going to be some trial or some real estate negotiation.
Personnel exemption.
Privacy matters.
Yeah.
The exemption they used was that this was attorney-client privilege, which we've heard a lot about lately. I joked there must be some kind of mistake because I was requesting documents from Jerry Braun, the chief of staff of the city attorney's office, to people in the city council member offices. And
why would that require there being a mistake?
Because Jerry Braun is not an attorney.
There it is.
So that just got me. What are you talking about? So they responded, and they said, quote, Mr. Braun's communications that are responsive to your request were made in his capacity as chief of staff of the city attorney's office, were confidential in nature, and were related to a subject of legal representation by this office. Therefore, they are exempt from disclosure as attorney-client privilege. All right. So I talked to a bunch of attorneys, and there was kind of a consensus along the idea that if he's serving as a vessel for Mara Elliott, Mara Elliott's the city attorney, and she can have like secretaries and paralegals and stuff. And if he's just a vessel for her and passing along information from her to a client, somebody considered a client, then maybe that qualifies. But since we don't know what these messages were, that's hard to evaluate. And what kind of gets me is that this is while this whole controversy with the council member Chris Keatts is raging, right? So he's accused of violating the attorney-client privilege. He's a city council member for releasing this opinion that got in his hands, right?
Yeah.
About the Soccer City project. And they're saying he committed a criminal act because he did this. But we're really muddling the lines of what is an attorney-client privilege here, in my opinion. If this guy, Jerry Braun, who's not an attorney, is protected by it, and these messages that he talked to with somebody who may not even be a client, I'm not sure that the city council staff qualifies as clients because we don't know. This is all so muddy.
Right. And we don't know what the nature of the communications were. I mean, they could have been talking about like a sandwich order for a meeting, and that's certainly not, legal advice, but we don't know.
Yeah. And so basically what they're communicating to me, in my opinion, is that everything he says is attorney-client privilege.
Or at least they can provide that blanket exemption.
Yeah, that basically the secrecy. So, and then who the client is depends on how much they want to keep secret, basically. The client in this case being somebody who works at these city council member offices.
Well, and there's no real indication that it would stop at city council offices. What about all of the rank and file city staffers that interact with city attorney staff on a regular basis are all is any communication the moment a representative from the city attorney's office is looped in necessarily privileged information.
And I think this really brings into relief the odd role that Braun plays. So he's the chief of staff of the city attorney. Chief of staff is normally a political type position, right? The mayor has a chief of staff. The city attorneys that I remember, I've been through 4 or 5 of them now, never had a chief of staff. They had an executive assistant city attorney who was a city attorney,
a lawyer.
Attorney. Yeah. And so it's pretty clear to me that not only is Braun playing this role as this non-attorney, really managing, what's his staff? If he's the chief of staff, who's his staff? The other attorneys? Maybe he's set to the side of them, but then who's he chief of? And so I think this really brings into relief like the position that he's been playing as a very politically influential advisor, and maybe part of the reason why she is herself involved in so many political sort of dramas these days.
And that right there puts in relief something that we have talked about a lot on this show, which is the irony that Maura Elliott, separating herself from all of her opponents in the city attorney's race last year, had one fundamental claim, which was that she didn't believe that the city attorney's office should be expressly political, and that she actually had said she would like to make it much more like what the County Board of Supervisors has, which is an unelected, just legal counsel.
Yeah, she highlighted John Witt, the city attorney from the 90s, well known for sort of being in the, kind of in the background or whatever. I asked her, so I was trying to refresh my memory, so I went back to the podcast we recorded with her when she was running for city attorney.
This was a long time. This was like almost a full year before the November election in 2016.
And here's how she described how important it was for a city attorney not to get involved politically or start playing some of these games that she'd seen with Mike Aguirre, the former city attorney.
So if sometimes we get a question and the answer is an easy no, you can't do it, it's not legal.
Mm-hmm.
Very rare. The more common approach is yes, but, and then you give the options and the risk associated with each. But our role is not to tell them what to do.
Mm-hmm.
Or if we don't like it for political reasons or it just doesn't feel right, we can't put the kibosh on it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that Aguirre took more of a role of I don't like it, doesn't feel right, doesn't suit the people I think are my client, and I'm not going to go forward. And it just stopped all operations. And I think the worst part is it created a lack of a relationship between the city attorney's office and their own client, which is terrible because you don't get things done, and it's costly because who is their lawyer?
Right.
You have to hire somebody outside of
which we've seen over the years come up.
Right, and that's just ridiculous.
It's very, very well put. Yeah. That and I think, look, this just highlights that every city attorney since Aguirre has tried to say they're not going to be political, and they all see that they're really a big deal in City Hall.
Yeah, the other piece of this, even if you step back, if you take away Maura Elliott and Jerry Braun and the situation with Chris Keatts, is this really drives home. I don't think the public quite understands the extent to which public officials deny records that are public for all kinds of reasons all the time. It used to be you could just use your cell phone and your personal email account. The Supreme Court just said, that's not kosher. They use private email servers. They do all these things. They claim all these exemptions all the time. So this is a new one for us.
Yeah.
And I think it's ridiculous, but this happens so much, and there's so much information that's not being made public that should be public.
And we'll keep we'll put the public pressure on, and we'll see what we can do through the courts as well. We have a fact check this week. State Senator Ben Waso was one of many who showed up October 12th in front of the county building and made some demands about what the county should be doing to address mental health and homelessness issues in San Diego. And he said, quote, they're sitting on, this is the county, they are sitting on over $100 million with a $42 million reserve for who knows what reason, basically alleging that there's a bunch of money for mental health services that the county's not spending. Lisa Halverstadt looked into that and found that it was very much true.
Yeah.
There's $166 million in that Mental Health Services Act account. That includes $42 million for reserve. Basically, they say, yeah, we're going to spend it a little bit, and it's really hard to spend. That was my favorite.
Yeah, the other thing that Lisa found out was that basically a lot of counties have this issue. I don't think that really absolves our county necessarily, but a lot of big counties have this huge multi-million-dollar or $100 million plus money sitting in a bank.
Yeah, it's like Prop 63 or something that was passed to raise money for this sort of thing, goes through the state, gets to the county's in charge of spending that. And yeah, LA had hundreds of millions of dollars sitting. But again, yeah, look, we have an unprecedented mental health crisis on the streets right now. And if you don't have resources, that's one thing. But if you have $100 million sitting there, that's something maybe we should talk about, that where it can be used.
I mean, there are very public conversations going on right now about raising taxes to pay for issues related to homelessness. That being the case, you would think you might have a sense of urgency to spend the money you already have at your disposal for these very same services.
Yeah, the other thing I didn't really realize when Lisa first undertook this fact check is that this is a different multi-million-dollar pot of money that isn't being used than the reserve fund, which she's also written about.
Yeah, $2 billion. Yeah, that's $2 billion.
Those are two separate things that aren't being spent on things like homelessness and mental health services.
No wonder they were willing to just offer money to the NFL.
Right. It's just sitting there.
But also not really.
Yeah, we didn't do that, really.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to do our hero and goat on this second part of the show after the break. And we have Mark Cafferty from San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation talk about a few things like whether we're going to get Amazon and where all those people would live if we did. This has been the Voice of San Diego podcast and radio show in partnership with News Radio 600 Coke.
This podcast is sponsored in part by a proud supporter of Monarch Schools and Make-A-Wish San Diego. Monarch School educates students impacted by homelessness and helps them develop hope for a future with the necessary skills and experience for personal success. Make-A-Wish San Diego grants wishes to children with life-threatening medical conditions to enrich the human experience with hope, strength, and joy. To learn more about how you can get involved, please visit monarchschools.org and sandiego.wish.org.
Okay, we're back. This is Scott Lewis. I'm, of course, here with my friend Andrew Keatts and Sarah Libby, the voice of San Diego, the gruesome threesome, Three Amigos. We have our hero of the week. This week's hero is Pat Finn. Pat, by the way, Blue Finn. Her middle name is Blue.
Wow.
Isn't that fantastic?
Blue like the color or like
Blue like
Jungle
the color.
Book? Okay, I couldn't hear.
I'm sorry. She said it was hard when she was growing up, but I think it's fantastic.
It's pretty awesome.
Pat Blue Finn is been a long time. She began her career at KTLA in Los Angeles, and in 1979 she started working for KPBS. Worked a long time with Gloria Penner in various roles at KPBS. R.I.P. Gloria Penner, somebody I was close with at KPBS. But also, Pat is just wonderful, and she's organized the Roundtable for a long time. She oversaw the station's local and national productions, including various documentaries. And, she's just been great. And one other thing, she's fantastic at Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Best Twitter account around.
There is a deadpan to it that is unrivaled.
Yeah. It's really good.
It's really pleasant. When
she doesn't need 280 characters.
At first, when she started, she's like, what is this dumb thing? And it was from there, it just was perfect.
Yeah.
My rule is never tweet, but I'm so glad that she tweets because she always says exactly the right thing.
Just perfect, succinct. Anyway, we learned this week that she was leaving KPBS full-time, her job there. Mm-hmm. She's going to be doing some freelance work on the media, from what I understand, which maybe why we're heroing her, to get on her good side.
Get on the good side. Yeah.
But anyway, wonderful presence in local media, and I wanted to make sure she was recognized, and we have a forum to do that. our GOAT of the week.
You lose! Good day, sir!
So this goes to El Cajon Mayor Bill Wells. So this was another fact check that our friend Lisa did. And he said almost all homelessness is linked to drugs or alcohol, which I think is a pretty common attitude. But it's, especially eyebrow-raising when it's raised by a politician to justify certain policies. So Lisa talked with a lot of experts and consulted a lot of national surveys, and all of the numbers and all of the consensus shows that maybe about 25 to as high as 40% of the homeless population has dealt with drug or alcohol issues, but that's far from being every single homeless person. And when Wells was, we asked him about his statement, he said, I think a lot of these figures are politically motivated. So the numbers are lying because of politics, but him citing an unfounded statement.
Just the facts.
It's just the facts.
Look, I'm uncomfortable sometimes when people just highlight like the most sympathetic situations that some homeless folks are in. But it's also important to get this right. And there is a portfolio of there's a whole spectrum of different types of people who are dealing with homelessness right now. And it doesn't aid any kind of effort to address it, to just blanket swipe them all as one thing or another. And that happens so much. And I find it's an easy way for people to wash their hands of the problem. They don't
Absolutely. Why invest in hard solutions and difficult conversations if they're just all on drugs, so it doesn't matter.
I mean, they're human beings. And also there's a public health issue. There's a lot of response, but also just accept the facts and let's make appropriate good decisions to address them. All right. So this is the part of the show where I encourage you to help us pay for this service. This is a community. The people who are out there listening to this show, you are all experiencing the same thing, having a shared experience. And this community is being supported, though, by a very small minority of its members. So if you want to make that a little bit bigger ratio, I'd very much appreciate it. You can help support us at voiceofsandiego.org/donate. And now stay tuned for Mark Cafferty from the Regional Economic Development Corporation. All right, we are joined in the great Voice of San Diego podcast studio, truly the greatest podcast studio in downtown San Diego, by Mark Cafferty. He's the CEO of the San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
So are you off to Barcelona or Bangkok?
No, we're
Beijing.
We're back now. We've been in London and Cambridge recently, but we're back here in San Diego for the rest of the year.
Did you talk to the Queen?
We didn't talk to the Queen. We did get into Parliament for a little bit and got to meet with some members
Yell
there.
at somebody? Yell at Corbyn?
I didn't. I figured, we could have gotten some heavy news coverage if we did, but
sure.
we stayed away from that.
So we wanted to bring you on to help us sort of demystify some of these discussions that go on.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just review some of the facts. Amazon last month, was it? The company Amazon?
Early September.
Early September announced that it was going to create a second headquarters, right?
Yep.
And that they needed a place for it. And they basically opened this gigantic bidding war.
Absolutely right.
And did San Diego participate in said war? Did we submit a proposal?
We did. We are one of 239 areas across the country that submitted a proposal.
Okay. Now, is it connected with the Chula Vista one?
Yeah, it's the same proposal.
Okay. So what is it? Can you tell us anything?
So it is, it's interesting. It is a really strange process because everything about it is very normal. We get requests all the time from businesses who are saying, not usually that they ever want to create a second headquarters, that's abnormal, but saying that they want to expand somewhere, but they usually do it very quietly. They come to you and they want you to sign non-disclosure forms, and they say there's 4 or 5 cities we're looking at, and oftentimes you won't even know who the other cities are. So the interesting thing about this is if you read, it was a very, very basic RFI. They're requesting information on essentially 9 things from your region. but it was released as a Word document through the press, which was again, completely abnormal.
It was a Word doc?
It was a Word doc. Yep, and it was Amazon. It was because as basic as can be. They wanted hard copies delivered back to them. They didn't want electronic copies, which was another just strange thing about all this.
Are we sure it was really Amazon?
We are sure. We actually fact checked that ourselves. We spent a little bit of time on that to make sure, because I don't know if you heard the fake news this weekend that we got word that we got.
It was the Chicago Times.
The Chicago Times News website. Yep.
I was disappointed by how many people had posts up asking if that was real.
Yeah, so basically he said San Diego had been chosen, but this was a fake.
Yeah, so we could do a whole show. I could tell you about the 36 different messages I got from everyone from elected officials to former board chairs of ours to
It's good.
I don't want to know.
I don't wanna know.
I do. We'll get into that in a minute.
Pretty fascinating.
I want to bathe and how bad this was, really.
So anyways, but on the real side, they gave everybody a little over a month, which is fast, but that's again not a strange amount of time, and it had this very public process where they wanted the press covering it. They wanted to know everybody who was sort of in, and of the 9 things that they put in there that they wanted to know, 3 of the 9 are about incentives, and types of incentives that would be offered from your state. And if you follow Amazon's business model and their history, there may be no company ever in the history of the United States that's gotten more money in incentives in taxpayer dollars than Amazon.
Wow.
The NFL, maybe.
The NFL, you know what? That's probably a good point.
Tesla did pretty well too, right?
Tesla, yeah.
I mean, you're talking tens of billions of dollars they've received already.
All right. So what kinds? So can you share what we offered, or?
Yeah. So, and again, trying to really focus on what they were asking for.
Yeah.
Everybody had some Jeff Bezos story they wanted to tell me that their brother went to college with them, and so they could call him and find things. But the reality was they were asking for some pretty straightforward things. It was the demographics in your area. It was proximity to an airport. They had population information. And really, while 239 regions submitted, there's really 50 metropolitan statistical areas that even meet the basic requirements. So of that, you could really say our proposal is probably one of 50 that will be taken at least seriously because it meets the requirement.
Now, some of the questions, did you just answer with like a smiley face? Because it doesn't look so good for us? Or
no, actually, I mean, all what they're looking for looks good for us. I mean, they want information on how well educated the workforce is, what your STEM degrees look like, where your universities are, how large they are. All that bodes. I mean, on a straight up talent campaign, I mean, San Diego can wage that campaign with anybody, and California can really wage that campaign. When you try to get into their mind on, are they looking for an East Coast headquarters because they're already West Coast? Do they want to be in the Midwest? Is there, Jeff Bezos bought a home in D.C. Does he want to be in the Metro D.C. area? All those things, factor in, and those are things that are just completely beyond our control. So we try to say to them, look, we're going to give you 4 looks at what you could do in this region that meet the basic requirements you've given us. And that could range from, if you want to take a piece of land like Mission Valley and fully redevelop it with infrastructure that's already there, transit that's there, and all kinds of possibility, that's a possibility. If you want to go down to a place like Chula Vista, one of the most diverse cities anywhere in the country right now, and with all kinds of land opportunity and people who are willing to throw $400 million in incentives at them just from the city of Chula Vista to really kind of anchor economic growth they're hoping for decades to come? Or would you sort of ring together, a trail of great innovation spaces downtown? Or do you put the border into the mix? Because really, who else can put the border into the mix like we can in San Diego? So there's 4 sites in there that we put forward, and that's pretty typical in a proposal like this. And most of our peers up and down the state would do the same.
You joked about California and San Diego being able to compete really well in terms of higher education and STEM, but there are, factors that don't bode well for San Diego or California. I've heard a lot of people talk about housing and the cost of housing, but one of the other things that Amazon really put a premium on was transit and the availability of transit. So how did you guys kind of reconcile with that?
Yeah, so those are weaknesses, and the Mission Valley site, is a site that has a lot of possibility on that front, and has all kinds of infrastructure already there existing that could be great downtown with the trolley lines that'll be extending up to UCSD in the future and up to other pockets of employment. The South Bay sites become more challenging, but I think as we start to, the highway infrastructure obviously is very strong and built up down that way. So, really the public transportation, when you're competing with cities like a Boston and a New York and the places where that is really dialed in and done very well. The second thing is the cost of housing. I mean, the reality is one of the challenges they've faced, or so people, challenges, what are the issues that's come about from Amazon in Seattle is how Seattle has reacted to the growth of Amazon. If you talk to many people, not all, but there's a lot of folks who feel that this is entirely coming about because of Seattle growing completely at odds with Amazon and vice versa, with both sides feeling like Amazon feels like it's created a great deal of economic growth for Seattle, so therefore you should be investing more in what we need, and Seattle saying, we've invested an awful lot in you, you're making record profits, you need to start reinvesting in the community. And so on the housing front, that's why a place like Chula Vista is an interesting opportunity. Housing prices are better there. They're still not low compared to the rest of the country, but when you're talking about these 50 specific metropolitan statistical areas that they're really looking at or going to look at, we're one of the more expensive. We're in the top quarter, for being one of the more expensive housing
I had
markets.
a hard time picturing where we would put 50,000 people.
Yeah.
Just the bare facts of how many people that is seems like it would.
I mean,
greatly,
that alone. If you assume 50,000 employees of Amazon, give or take between 70 and 100,000 people between their loved
families,
ones that come with them. Let's call it 50,000 housing units. That's years worth of our production.
Absolutely right. It also, keep in mind though, for Amazon to grow to 50,000 people in Seattle took about 12 years. So what they're looking for out of the gate, it's interesting. They've got massive numbers out there, but what they're looking for out of the gate is a space that they can be into in 2019 that's 500,000 square feet. So they're throwing around these 8 million square feet numbers, 50,000 employees. It will grow to the size of the campus in Seattle or larger. All that's possible, but it would take decades to get there. So I think whoever gets this is going to have to be putting in decades worth of urban planning around it, almost treating it like in a much different sort of way when you hear everybody say, let's all coalesce around the Olympics if we get it and try to get these infrastructure projects and things done. Whoever gets it is going to need to treat it like that and considerably more, because it will, if you're going to add 50,000 people to any region in a metropolitan area across the country, you're going to run into the same challenges.
And so I wonder, is there any way to take the work that's gone into this, the effort that you've done, and allow it to exist regardless of what their decision is?
Yeah.
So that if you've put forward this plan and say, here's how we think we could viably improve transit to the extent that you want, or provide the housing that you would need, that it could funnel into some of the other existing planning or economic conversations we have in the city, some of which are existing, some of which maybe need a boost.
Absolutely right. No, I think you're absolutely, what we're hoping for is that no matter what happens, you take a place like Chula Vista, they've now gotten millions of people across the country to even know who they are and what they could do down there, and there's possibilities of doing something down there. So we have some responsibility as a region, I think, to support that effort going forward as much as we can. I think when you get into the ideas of how would you accommodate 50,000 people and how would you build a much better, if not a world-class transit system that would need to be, around to accommodate what Amazon's talking about, I think that all starts if you get to this sort of second tier with them. So if they do, and I don't know that this is how it will play out, if they do announce this second tier of cities, and let's say they choose 10 across the country, and they really then want to get into discussions of what could be available to us right away for the 500,000 square feet, and what could we be working on together over the next decade to kind of build out what we need, I think any region, we included, need to be kind of thinking that far out and that big and bold about what we'd have to do to accommodate that. I
mean, some of the conversations that we have around transit in San Diego and housing, we can't even get buy-in on the premise.
I know.
Right? Like we're still disputing whether it would or would not be good.
Yeah.
So does the sheer fact that Amazon has requested these things suggest to anyone that maybe it's a worthwhile thing to spend money on, whether it's Amazon or Microsoft down the line or some other company, that public transit has an economic benefit?
Well, if you look at it, people's politics aside, they can read this however they want. What they, in addition to the square footage and all the things that they needed, what they wanted was lots of information on how you would utilize renewable energy. How green would your spaces be? How clean would they be? what's the quality of life? And as they talk about the quality of life, they define it very heavily around, walking and biking and mobility and things of that nature. And then you get into the idea that they're actually saying, yes, they have to be proximate to an international airport, and they wanted certain connectivity, and luckily we have that. But they also then talked about being proximate to mass transportation. And, as Sarah said, that looks completely different in cities around the country right now, and San Diego is not at the forefront on that. Ironically, Cubic Transportation Systems, who's here in San Diego, is the organization who just got the New York subway contract for $1 billion. They do the tube in the underground in London. They do the ferry systems in Sydney and Melbourne. They do all public transportation in Vancouver, which I guess moves more people per capita than maybe anywhere. And, and their CEO drives to work from Poway to Kearny Mesa in San Diego. And so we've had some real serious conversations about, we've got to figure out if we have that company headquartered here and their brain power is and their innovation is doing that around the globe, what are we doing here?
Maybe we can skip a few letters like China and just like have tubes or something, like just like Hyperloop tubes or something.
Well, they really believe, in all seriousness, they really believe that what San Diego's got to put real heavy infrastructure in for and real heavy bets on is autonomous vehicles. So, regardless of what people think right now the future of that's going to look like, their take on it is, we've built out highways so much in San Diego. We have such large highways and such large highway infrastructure that now spending on top of that to do massive public transportation is going to be challenging. So what they think is, you have to make key investments and then have these first and last mile opportunities that you could utilize. If San Diego could be, in their minds, if the region could be at the forefront of the autonomous vehicle movement, then we could catch up with these other great public transportation areas around the country who they think are going to actually have to be making some significant changes to their structure to accommodate that.
What do you actually make, just as a professional in this space? What do you make of people like you from all of these different regions sort of scurrying their resources and their finite hours into one company's expansion push?
Bring it real, Mark.
Yeah, I think it's pretty crazy, to be honest, and not in a good way. I think that it was one of these things where people said, we have to do this, right? We have to do it. Every major metro is going to do it. Well, San Antonio came out and said they weren't going to do it. So Texas had other cities. They had plenty of other cities that came forward, but San Antonio just boldly early on said, like, they could check the boxes, they could meet the criteria, but they decided not to do it. There were other folks who came out.
Is this like when you pretend not to like a girl?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit.
Like,
no, I think for us, what it is had we not put in a proposal as a region, would people be saying, are we crazy that we're just missing this? I mean, even if Amazon only puts 5,000 jobs here and they never get to 50,000 people, why would we not take a swing at that? I think the reality, though, is you're looking at an incentive game. You're looking at a company that has sort of mapped out its growth across the United States by getting an awful lot of money to put their facilities in different places. And then ironically, in a lot of ways, causing some damage to the types of companies in those places who were once doing the kind of work that they do. So right now, what you have in the Amazon, proposal is you've got an organization who knows New Jersey will give them $5 billion now and $5 billion down the line just to come to New Jersey, and that whoever they go with, we're gonna see some record off the chart, incentive package, or we're gonna see someone like Governor Brown who's willing to play that game but in a different way. Say, look, California's brand should be strong enough to stand on its own, and if it is, great, and if it's not, then have another shot at the East Coast or the Midwest or wherever they want to be.
So you mentioned that Amazon has been able to wrangle all these subsidies just to an unprecedented extent. And the LA Times has done some really great reporting lately about what Disney gets out of the city of Anaheim. Yep. And maybe the city of Anaheim doesn't get as much out of Disney as it would like. Is there any point, is it too early to be having these conversations about like, well, what would we get out of Amazon or what would we hold them to? Or is it just like, we'll wait and see?
I think I think the premise of what you're saying is absolutely right. I think that we're in an era of folks who, back to Andy says, like people who do what I do. It used to be that everyone, your huge argument that you would make is we just have to give more money to businesses. We have to be a competitive state. And interestingly enough, the states that give the most money are all very red states. So you really benefit the most when you're in Nashville or you're in Austin and you're a blue city in a red state, because you've got the knowledge capital that people want, and then you got a state that's just throwing money at folks. And I think the reality is the NFL has shown us this, and the backlash that you've gotten. I think the Disney stuff is when we decide, the moment you decide that we're going to give money to Amazon to be here, but we haven't given any money to the Qualcomms and the Illuminas and the Cubics who are growing here, who have long kind of grown here, and they've made whatever investments and they've paid for what they need. You suddenly set off a backlash locally that I actually think can be quite damaging.
Yeah, it's like a dystopian sort of feel to that capitalism is basically just this game of metropolitan areas in the same federal union.
Yep.
Like just sort of shuffling the pieces around and competing against each other.
Yeah, wherein nothing is being created. It's like you're moving from one across an imaginary line.
Yeah.
The only extent to which anything matters is who gets those tax dollars.
Yep.
It's a weird competition that way.
Let me ask you, let's sort of demystify it. When this happens, do you so that this thing comes out, who decides like how it's going to work? Did your phone just ring off the hook?
Yeah.
And you're like, you must have gotten 100 text messages.
We did,
how to do it. So how does that work? How do you get nominated? Does the city have to sign off? Did the mayor call you and say, hey, I don't know, Mark, I don't know if you're up to this? Or
So we got, we had about 65 messages that morning that it came out. A lot of them were from people in commercial real estate. That's a group that watches anything like this. A lot of them were just folks who follow business, publications in some of the places, TechCrunch and some of in Bloomberg and some of the places where it came out, board members of ours, everyone. And then before you knew it, just people were tweeting and retweeting, and you had mayors coming out very early, Rahm Emanuel and others, just an hour after the proposal was even released and the news had come out saying that Chicago, is here to be the next home for Amazon. So what happened here was we got all of that. We had to sort through it, and we actually did want to figure out if it was real and find out. And I've got to be honest with you, as we sit in the room, here's the reality. 9 out of 10 times when something like this happens on a smaller scale, so someone says we have 1,000 jobs, we want to put them there. 9 out of 10 times our experience is that company winds up staying where they already are. So they're using whatever cities they're getting information from as leverage back home to say, before we put our next 1,000 jobs somewhere else, are you going to do something for us here in Washington State? There is a very strong argument that could be made that what they're doing right now with Amazon is collecting all this money, all this information from across the country, so they'll have it because they're going to be doing distribution centers and everything else. But to go back to Washington State and say, before you lose our next 50,000 jobs we're going to grow, do you really want? Is that the hand that you're going to play? So locally, what happened was we just got buzzed from everybody, and we knew right away we have to do this regionally. When we do everything in San Diego, we can't be the city of San Diego and then having Chula Vista or North County. So we got on the phone on a Monday morning. It came out on like a Friday with all the municipalities, everybody who does economic development work in every municipality in the region, in our team to say, we'd be willing to lead it. We write these things a lot. This is not dissimilar to what you normally ask us to do, but do you have any objections to that? And all of them, to an entity, said, no, you should do it, and we're all in and supporting that. We then called what are called the sub-regional EDCs, so East County EDC, North County EDC, South County EDC, Downtown Partnership, folks who have some part of the region that they focus on, and had the same sort of phone call, brought in Connect, other groups, and everybody still said, we think you'd be the perfect group to organize it. While that was happening, the mayor actually tweeted out that we would be organizing a response for the region. We hadn't really even spoken to him about it yet. He just said, I've directed the San Diego Regional EDC to do this. So we said, okay, well, we've got some direction now. So, so we got everybody's blessing. I know we got everyone's blessing on that. And then
Sounds presidential.
And then we started. That's very, very true. And we started just to organize everyone, and we had Monday phone calls, and we just kind of kept inviting more and more folks in. And ultimately, you then get down to needing to have 7 or 8 people who write this and put it all together.
Yeah. So there's somebody like 3 o'clock in the morning, pounding coffee.
That'd be our team. Yeah, that's right.
So can we switch to other regional?
Yeah.
Or you got
well, I have one question that I've been thinking about lately. This fits into it, but just in general, the work that you do. A plan like the Climate Action Plan, right, that has these pretty broad goals for the city and pretty strict requirements in a bunch of different ways. Does something like that ever end up directing or informing how you go about your economic development strategies? Because fundamental to what that plan suggests is that
people need to be able to work in a certain area, live in a certain area, and get around.
Yep.
And so, when you're weighing an incentive package for a company's expansion, does it ever enter into it that we'd be able to give you X if you are located in Kearny Mesa, but we'd be able to give you Y if you would relocate to downtown San Diego based on this climate action
and that's
plan?
it factors in all the time, and that those things wind up being sort of guideposts that we have to pay attention to. We're unique in the sense that we're funded by the private sector, so we work with all the municipalities, but there's not ever an incentive package that EDC gives. We work with the different municipalities, we work with the state, we go after, but I think I think things like that, I mean, ironically, the Amazon thing is the dead opposite of our entire economic development strategy here locally. We realized long ago, 2% of all economic growth for regions comes from inbound migration of businesses. So even while Texas was heralding itself as the place that every California company should come, 98% of its job growth was happening from companies already there. And the overwhelming majority of that job growth comes from small businesses or new starts. So the moment you're getting into using your money to attract the big businesses to come to your region, the trend is big businesses become smaller. You just look at it across the country, while in the meantime, the businesses who are sort of not incentivizing. So our efforts really now are on the new starts, the small and medium-sized businesses. The companies are here. Amazon came up. It wound up being something we had to kind of take the reins on. But overall, even when we present on it, we say in some ways it kind of flies in the face of where we know our real focus needs to be as a region.
Well, we talked last time we had you in. We were talking about, I think it was right after Trump was elected, and we were a little concerned about some of the border commerce stuff. Have you seen that get? Is it all good now?
It's gotten so much better, right? It's horrible. In my opinion, it's horrible.
The conversations are still as dark as they were.
Yeah, they are, and I think the fact that we have almost a tourist attraction with these prototype walls down on the border is just a pretty disgusting thought when you think of everything that border means to our economy, everything that border means to the U.S. economy. And I think we've got some key folks, Jerry Sanders and Paola over at the Chamber, who are working on the policy side of this often. When we're in international markets, it's top of mind for everybody. The presidency is top of mind for everybody, but when they know that we're from San Diego, the talk of the wall and when's that going to be built and how's that going to be paid for is just still, it's just kind of still
I think that was the hardest part about those prototypes is it really showed what it would do to the literal view of Mexico,
Absolutely
which
right.
I cherish so much.
Yes.
I find it to be such a privilege to live here and to be able to look into Mexico and know that it's right there, and to be able to be right there and to see it. It's a symbol, of course, but it's an awful symbol.
It's an awful symbol, and it's an awful symbol that just is not. It's not lost on anyone out there what it really means. I think the discussions coming up in Mexico City around NAFTA are going to be really interesting because there's as much, it's not even hardball. The negotiations, the way I understand them, is me walking into the room with you all as Canadian and Mexican representatives and me basically telling you everything you're going to do differently and everything that we're not going to put up with anymore and everything that we're going to change, with no sort of open dialogue on what that means to your economy, what that even means to our economy. Some of the proposals that we're putting forward would have horrific impacts on the U.S. economy, and no one is vetting them out. So there's this weird sort of deal-making process being put into place, and maybe the idea is, it's like watch The Apprentice. In this contest where we're going to start by telling you have to do all of these things, then we're going to settle for you doing this many, is almost like a tried and true Trump strategy. But it's just amazing to think that that's what's going to be playing out in a place like Mexico City, when supposedly the top economic minds in North America are trying to decide the future of trade.
Are San Diego companies that are affected by the border commerce and the trade, are they aware of how important NAFTA is to that?
Oh, yeah.
And it's clear in their mind which policies are in danger or not.
I don't know that the latter part of that is true. I think there's a lot of confusion, and it's just really so hard to follow, day in and day out. What I hear all the time from folks on my own board is, well, don't listen to what he tweets or says. That's not really what's going on. It's all the smart people behind the scenes who are going to get X and Y done. And then, we get into some rooms with the quote unquote smart people behind the scenes, and X and Y is not getting done. And it's just a mess. And I think what you have in businesses here is they've long known what they're dealing with. So if you come here and you say, I'm going to put my North American operation do my distribution from San Diego through North America, and I'm going to manufacture in Mexico, we know that has a great impact, almost a dual impact for us in the region, and they know exactly what they're sort of buying into. The moment you start to say to them, you can't do that anymore, or you have to do it in a different way, or we're going to tax you differently on it, or we're not going to allow your goods to move back into this country unless X percentage of them is American made to begin with, all of those things just take people's existing business models and kind of throw them right out the window. I mean, we all run businesses in here. We couldn't operate our business if tomorrow someone came in and said, I'm going to decide unilaterally that you do it all differently. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think has most of them frozen right now. I mean, most of them are not panicking to us, like they're saying, I've just got to stop doing everything, but they're not moving, they're not growing because they just don't know what the certainty is.
Have you considered on some of your brochures and stuff something that says home of Voice of San Diego, the San Diego region?
When we go international, you're right at the forefront of what I talk about all the time. So people ask me about you all the time.
I'm sure.
So.
Mark Cafferty,
Keatts in particular.
Yeah, CEO of the San Diego Regional Economic Development Corporation. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you guys so much.
The Voice of San Diego podcast is part of the Voice of San Diego podcast network. Visit voiceofsandiego.org/podcast to learn more about the Cura Chaos show about movers and shakers on both sides of the border, Beer Talk Radio, our business shows Startup Vault and I Made It in San Diego, and the rest of the shows in the network. If you like the show, go to voiceofsandiego.org and click the donate button. Or if you'd like to sponsor it, contact me at kinsey@vosd.org. That's KINSEE@vosd.org.